Hey everyone, welcome back. I wanted to have a quick chat with you all about Donald Trump's primary opponents and their responses to his indictment in New York. Now, generally, you would have expected his opponents to take advantage of this opportunity to advance their own political ambitions, saying something to the effect of, well, we may not necessarily agree with this indictment, but being indicted has a very negative impact on someone's ability to win a general election. So, since we have the same policies as Trump but none of his legal baggage, you should vote for us instead so that we can have a much better chance of putting a Republican in the White House in 2024. And that makes sense. However, instead, they're coming out and vehemently defending him, with Ron DeSantis, his chief rival, going so far as to say that he would violate the U.S. Constitution by refusing to extradite Trump should that become necessary. Now, of course, that was an empty threat because we knew that Donald Trump was going to surrender voluntarily, but still, that's pretty far to go for someone that you don't think should win the nomination. So why are they doing it? Well, the simple answer is that they're afraid of Donald Trump's base. They don't think that they can win any election, be it the primary or the general election, without their support. However, I think there are a few things that most Republican politicians fundamentally misunderstand about Trump's core supporters. So, I wanted to talk about some of the unique aspects about Trump's base and why their support might not translate to most Republican politicians. So, what's so special about Donald Trump's base? If we look at them based on demographics, they're not that different from the average Republican voter. They tend to be white, they tend to be male, they tend to not have a college education, they tend to live in rural areas, etc. But I think the key thing that's different about Donald Trump's base than most Republican voters is the fact that they were unlikely voters before 2016. These were people who didn't participate in the political process often, and mostly because they didn't trust it. And I think a great example of their mentality comes from this interview that Marjorie Taylor Greene recently gave with 60 Minutes.
What made me run for Congress when I saw the Republicans in Congress, the House and the Senate, completely fail to deliver the agenda that we had all voted for, the reasons why we voted for Donald Trump. It was
The Republicans.
Yep.
That right there is probably one of the best explanations I've ever heard for how Donald Trump's base views the U.S. political system. While they certainly don't like the Democratic Party, they also don't trust the Republican Party to actually deliver on their promises. And that's where Donald Trump comes in. Before he became president, Donald Trump's brand was success, even though his business records might indicate otherwise. But he was able to bring that brand into the Republican primary in 2015 and say, all these other establishment Republicans, they don't know what they're doing. But I'm Donald Trump. I built all these buildings, I wrote the art of the deal, I know how to get things done. And Donald Trump is a very charismatic individual and was able to convince all of these unlikely voters that he alone could fix it. And therefore, they trusted him. And they voted for him. And inevitably, when he didn't deliver on most of his campaign promises, he passed the blame onto other, more establishment Republicans, saying something like, oh, all these rhinos got in my way. I would have done this, but I couldn't. The establishment was in my way, and they weren't really ready to fight for you. And eventually it evolved into language like, when they attack me, they're really attacking you. And all of this was to build a brand where him and his supporters are intertwined in a way that anything that happens to Trump that's good is good for his supporters. Anything that's bad that happens to Trump is bad for his supporters. And it really creates a cult of personality that is focused purely on Donald Trump rather than the broader Republican Party. So the question is, can any other Republican politician actually tap into this base of support? And given the evidence we have, I think that answer is probably no. What we've seen in the 2018, 2020, and 2022 elections suggests that even if they're Trump's hand-picked candidates, there's going to be a segment of Trump's base that still doesn't trust them. Even though they're Republican candidates that have been endorsed by Donald Trump, you hear conspiracies and whispers that, oh, this person is actually in the establishment and they're trying to push Donald Trump in a certain direction, or that they're saying all the words, but they don't really mean it because they're being paid off by a special interest or George Soros or whoever else. It varies conspiracy to conspiracy, but that personal loyalty that they have to Donald Trump doesn't even extend to the people Trump endorses. So it's going to be very hard for Trump's primary opponents to ever tap into the space of support, since they're going to be perceived as being disloyal to the man that these voters trust. For example, let's look at Nikki Haley. She promised that she wouldn't run for president in 2024 if Trump was running, and yet here they both are running for president. And Donald Trump's base is not going to take that betrayal of trust kindly, and I don't think they'd ever support Haley even if she did win the Republican nomination. And Donald Trump has been trying to make similar attacks against Ron DeSantis, saying that he only became governor by Trump's endorsement, and that DeSantis is betraying Trump by now running against him. Trump has also tried to link DeSantis to people like Paul Ryan, who are seen as that very establishment Republican that his base inherently distrusts. And therefore, again, I think even if Ron DeSantis does win the nomination, which is certainly more possible than Haley, there's going to be a fragment of Trump's base that says, no, we still don't trust DeSantis. He's in there with Paul Ryan and the other people who didn't support Trump when he needed them most. We're not going to vote for him because we don't think he's actually going to represent us. This creates a real problem for Republican politicians as they continue to shift further and further to the right to court voters that still don't necessarily trust them. A lot of these Republican politicians, they say all the right words, but they just don't seem as genuine as Trump does, and there's just not that same emotional connection. So Trump's base just doesn't trust them the way that they trust the former president. However, in the meantime, by shifting further and further to the right, the Republican Party is abandoning those moderate and independent voters that are critical to winning key elections. And we've seen that a number of times over the last 3 election cycles. At the end of the day, I think we can expect to continue to see both Trump's primary opponents as well as other Republican politicians continue to defend him in an effort to court his base of supporters, despite the fact that they're never going to trust any Republican politician the way that they trust Donald Trump. And after Trump is out of the political picture, they're probably going to go back to being unlikely voters. In the meantime, they're abandoning those moderate and independents that are going to be critical to winning elections in the future. So, overall, this doesn't seem like a great strategy for the Republican Party going forward if they actually want to win more than a Republican primary. Think about it.